Welcome to Rockers for Life. I am Diane and I am your host. The reason why I do this show is because I like to say I am a champion of all music, and rock is truly my personal focus. I've got decades of experience in FM radio, and on this show, I'll be speaking with musicians, festival organizers, podcasters, record label owners. It's important to me to recognize what these people do in that realm of music, point to their contribution, and get a bit of background as to why they might have gone on that path to begin with. So, I'm bringing guests to you in a way that's a little more personal, a lot more fun. I am a rocker for life. Check the website, rockerforlife.com, and it looks like we are ready to rock on. Welcome to Rockers for Life. My guest today is Michael Alago.
Wow.
You love that?
That's cute.
It
I
is
love
cute.
it. Fabulous. Uh-huh.
Oh, so thank you for coming.
Well, yes, thank you for having me. I always love to see you.
And it is great to see you.
Good.
So your book will be coming out later this year.
Yes, my book comes out November 15th. I'm very
And-
excited. It's called I Am Michael Alago, Breathing Music, Signing Metallica, Beating Death. It's a long one, but once you see it on the page, it all just kind of makes sense.
And it's separate ideas, and it's perfect.
Yes, it is.
So you've been in the music business now for...
Well, officially, I got started in 1980 when I started working at the Ritz on East 11th Street.
Mm-hmm.
I became Jerry Brandt, who is the music director there, as assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, because, I think ever since I was 14 years old, and I was watching all of these music television shows back then, I always knew I wanted to be in music, but what does that mean to a 14-year-old? I didn't know, but I just thought, wow, I love all these shows that I'm watching. What am I going to do? So I was actually, I talk about this in the documentary a little bit as well. Maybe I could tell it to you a little different. I was walking down East 11th Street because I was working at a pharmacy on Astor Place, and I saw a sign on the wall of a building, and I can't remember if it said video club opening or dance club opening. Whatever it said, it interests me. So I walked into the venue, and I looked. It was beautiful. I mean, because even in the daytime, the lights were on because the staff was cleaning. But the whole building, it's 1920s Art Deco architecture.
Yes.
So that was like wow factor. And then all of a sudden, there was a man in the balcony, and he says, "Can I help you, kid?" And I was like, "Yeah, I like this place. I would like to work here." And he says, "Do you have a resume?" And I always laugh about that because I was like, "No, I go to the School of Visual Arts and I work at a pharmacy down the block." Well, he thought that was a hoot, and he called me up into his office, and we started talking about music, all kinds of music, from the big band era to contemporary rock, pop music, popular music of the day. And he liked that I knew so much about music. And I don't remember if it was that day or a couple of days later. It had to be a couple of days later. He called me at the pharmacy and he said, "Kid, I'm going to hire you. You're going to open my mail, you're going to get my lunch, and you're going to answer my phone." And I thought to myself, oh my God, I've arrived. I'm in the music business. And you know what? Technically, I was in the music business,
Absolutely.
The Ritz was just opening.
It's amazing.
I was the first person, I think, on staff hired, and I was Jerry's assistant for 3 years there.
Yeah.
It was really mind-boggling that this 19-year-old kid was his assistant. Every night we had somebody fantastic there, from Prince to the comeback of Tina Turner. There was 5 nights of her there, to Kid Creole and the Coconuts. I mean, there was such a diverse range of artists that performed there. Very specifically, those first 3 years that I was there.
Yeah. So you said that in your initial conversation with Jerry,
Yes.
that he was impressed by your knowledge of music. So what was your upbringing like? Like, was there appreciation for music in your household? What were you listening to?
Right. Well, I guess in a very early age, maybe like 12 years old, I used to go to my Aunt Jenny's house across the street, and she was drop dead gorgeous, and she loved music. And so I would look through the vinyl, and she used to listen to Johnny Mathis, Nina Simone, Isaac Hayes, Nancy Wilson, and I just started listening to those records. And when I came back home and turned on the TV, I remember on Saturdays, probably at 11 o'clock in the morning, it was a Soul Train hosted by Don Cornelius.
Oh, yeah.
And at some point on that Saturday, it was Dick Clark, American Bandstand.
Oh, yeah.
And then probably really late at night, I think on a Friday, was In Concert. It was Friday night at 11:30 at night.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point there was also Don Kirshner's
Yes.
rock concert.
Mm-hmm.
So I watched all these things on television, and that started broadening my listening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Todd Rundgren, Chuck Berry, Steve Miller. Just, it was a diverse group of artists that were always on the television.
Mm-hmm.
So that informed my listening. And I always tell this part of the story very early on. I listened to AM radio. And you got to remember that in the 70s, AM radio was not formatted.
It was very diverse.
Very diverse.
Yeah.
You know, and I loved 77 WABC. And it was hosted by people like Dan Ingram. And he was fantastic. And you know, 1 minute you could hear Respect by Aretha Franklin, and the next thing you know, you're listening to Closer to Home, Part 1 of Grand Funk Railroad, and then Archie Bell and the Drells, and the Five Stair Steps, Ooh Ooh Child. I mean, so it was like an array of music that you heard on AM radio because it wasn't heavily formatted like it is today, where all you're hearing is top 40. The same top 40. I stopped listening to the radio a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I completely understand.
Yeah.
So what do you think was like your favorite song when you were 10? Let's see.
Sure. Could be Respect by Aretha Franklin. Yes. It just pops into my head because I remember the Atlantic Records label. It was red and black. I used to sit on my stoop with a little gray Panasonic record player, and I'd play all my 45s that I got for like 59 cents at the record store.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But she comes to mind just quickly because she was so incredible, and I did play that single until I wore it out. And when I wore it out, it just skipped. So I'd put a nickel on top of the on top of the what?
The arm.
The arm.
Yes.
And it pressed down, so it was a little heavy, so it stopped it from skipping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Little surgery there.
That's right.
Yeah.
A little trick that worked.
And so from there, was there anything that you were trying to do? Like you said, oh, I wanted to work in music, but there was no real, like, I'm going to go over here, I'm going to go over there.
That's right. I didn't know about any official music business stuff at 14 years old. But like I said, I watched all those shows on television, I listened to the radio, and I guess at some point, but now it's years later, that years later is maybe, well, I'm 18, 19 years old, and because I would visit my dad at his job on Astor Place, mostly on the weekend, I discovered the Village Voice. And I don't know if that's what you were just asking me about, though.
Yeah,
but,
kind of like the direction.
Sure. Yeah. And so what I remembered was going through the back pages of the Village Voice, where you saw advertisements for Broadway and off-Broadway, for porn theaters, for rock and roll venues. And that also was wildly diverse, those back pages. So all that early music listening and then discovering like the Village Voice is all because I was curious I was curious. I wanted to know everything about music. And I don't remember exactly when I started going to CBGB, but it was very early on. I was underage, and Hilly Crystal, the owner, was always great to us young people. But he said, if I see you with a drink, I think he said, you know, you couldn't come back for 2 weeks or something, you know, something like that. But, you know, that was early on. CBGB was my home away from home. You know, I used to see this vertical ad that they used to have in the back of CB's, and I would say, oh my God, what's a Cherry Vanilla? And what's a Dead Boys? And Deaf School? And oh my God, I heard about that group from the UK, Eddie and the Hot Rods are coming over. And it's just extraordinary. And I might be telling all this just a little out of order, but those were like the early days of how music, the different ways I was informed by music, the Village Voice, the television, the radio.
Well, and
my Aunt Jenny's house.
Yes, and what it meant in your life. Like, you went to CB's, and weren't you the founder of the Dead Boys fan club?
Yeah, you know, I met them really early on. I thought Stiv Bators was the wackiest, the craziest, the most exciting frontman that I had ever seen. Not that I had seen a lot of frontmen at that early age, but I just thought they were extraordinary. I loved the energy. I had a crush on their drummer, Johnny Blitz. I still do. I tell him that all the time. It's 2019. And me and my friend Jody Rubello, she also, another youngster, we fell in love with the Dead Boys very early on. We went to all of their shows there, and we decided we're going to make a fanzine. We only made one called All This and More, and you know, we distributed it. I mailed it to people. Excuse me. And that was kind of the beginning and the end of the fan club. But I never missed a Dead Boys show. I loved the Dead Boys. So, you know, anywhere in the tri-state area that they played, I would always go.
And that's early on, you doing something about, like, not just showing up and
yes,
being
that
in the
was
audience.
I guess that was the only thing early on.
Yeah. But still,
that I did as an idea.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I would get at that point in time, I would get the New Musical Express, Sounds, and what was that third British newspaper? Maybe it was just those two.
I remember.
No, the NME and Sounds.
Yeah.
Those were the two.
Yeah.
And you saw how things were starting to get cut out, and it was the beginning of things looking punk rock.
Yes.
So, you know, that's what me and my friend Jody did. We knew we wanted to call the Dead Boys zine All This and More, so we got all these newspapers, and we just started cutting out letters so that it looked punk rock.
So you were, like, taking it up in your own hands to create more audience for them, to sort of express yourself, because music made a difference for you.
Oh, totally.
And then,
you know, and I always tell people this, whether it was in the documentary or when people just talk to me about music or in the beginning of my memoir that's coming out, I believe I came out of the womb loving music. You know, that's all that I ever cared about. I don't know if I cared about anything else.
Yeah.
You know?
Right, totally.
You know, at some point in time when I was 17, 18, growing up, like, family was even secondary to music. I just, you know, I like I said, I used to sit on my stoop in Brooklyn, and I had a little gray Panasonic record player, and I would just play 45s. I became a people person very later on in life, but early on, I was very quiet. I kept to myself, and like I said, all I wanted to do was listen to music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally get that about you. So then you go from the Ritz and fast forward, so you're an A&R guy.
Well, if we're fast forwarding, sure.
Yes.
I was at the Ritz for 3 years, 1980 to 1983, and there was a friend of mine who became my boyfriend named Mitchell Krasnow. He said, you know, my dad is leaving Warner Brothers Records, and he's going to restart Elektra, because previous management put Elektra in the gutter, basically. I was going to say another word, but I didn't know if I could say the word, so we'll just say gutter.
That's fine.
You know, no, it's all good. I'm trying not to cuss anymore anyway as I get older. I'm doing a pretty good job of it. So anyway, Mitchell became my boyfriend, and I told Jerry Brandt after 3 years at the Ritz, you know, I just feel like there's more for me out there musically. Once again, I didn't know what that more meant. So when Mitchell said my dad is going to become the chairman of Elektra, I'm going to tell him he should meet you. And then I told Jerry, you know, Bob Krasnow is going to start Elektra, and I think I want to work at a record company. And Jerry said, you know, I'm very friendly with Bob Krasnow. I don't want to lose you, but I will tell him about you. So I had this interview with Bob Krasnow, the new chairman of Elektra, and he was very serious. Always had immaculate suits on, great cufflinks. He was no joke. You know what I mean? He was no joke. And I was scared because now I'm in the Time Warner building in a corporate environment, something that I knew nothing of. And I went to his office, and he had art on the walls. And art I knew about. I knew about art also at a very early age. So, but right now, let's see, we are in 1983. And on Bob's wall, he had Keith Haring, Robert Longo, all of these downtown contemporary artists. So I don't know, you know, like I thought I was a big shot, and I said, "Oh, so are you going to go to the Keith Haring show at Shafrazi?" And he like looked at me like, "Okay, I guess this kid might know something." And he said, "Yeah, I definitely am going to go. If you want, maybe we can go together." And I said, "Oh, that'd be fabulous." So again, the same thing happened. We started talking about music, everything from big band music to what was on the radio in 1983. And I think I was there for about an hour or so. He shook my hand and he said, "I'll give you a call." And 2 weeks later, he said he was going to hire me. It was really something. I was very touched by that because I thought, still, what am I going to do at a record company? And he said, "You're going to be in the A&R department." And I'm like, A&R, 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 A&R.
Did you know what that meant?
No. And I said, "Mitchell," he goes, "Oh, it's artist and development, artist and repertoire.
Yes.
And you develop artists." And I thought, oh my God. And you know, Bob knew that I knew nothing about that department.
But he had spoken to you.
Yes.
He knew you.
Yes, he knew me, and he took me under his wing. And you know, like he was setting up a whole new record company, but he was so very kind to me, and he liked me, and we liked talking about art together. And he also sometimes would call me in his office when he was on the phone with, you know, highfalutin lawyers and managers, and I would hear the dialogue. And at some point, he started referring these people. He says, "You're going to speak to Michael Alago. He's my new A&R person, and that's who you're going to talk to." Wow. It was, you know, for me, all of that was, how do you say, on-the-job training.
Yeah. And a huge vote of confidence.
Big vote.
Huge.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Like
And,
here you go, Michael.
you know, I knew also at an early age, it was about you're either going to sink or swim, and I was going to swim. And so, like I said, I knew a lot about music. I started at Elektra, I think about March of 1983. I had a fabulous assistant. Her name was Toni Quirk. At some point, I had another assistant, Keith Gildalian. I mix it up all the time. I don't know if I had Keith first or Toni first, but they were both fantastic. And, you know, it's like before the internet, so I would buy all of my favorite newspapers from Dallas, Austin, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Toronto, Montreal, London, New York, Boston, Chicago, and the list goes on. And we would subscribe to all these publications. And Toni would look at some, I would look at some, and I'd say, start cutting out all the music, everything about music. And we would call these artists and say, "So you have an independent record out?" You know, if it was like the Buck Pets from Dallas, Texas. And very early on, I became friends with someone in Dallas named Jeff Lyles, who was running a little place called the Profit Bar. And Jeff was, and still is, a right-on kind of guy, and he's so smart. And he became a really good friend of mine. So I'd get the Dallas Observer, and Jeff would, there was this area of town called Deep Ellum.
Yes.
So everybody started out playing that. Jeff would call me and say, there's a gal and her band called Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians. And now, because I want to tell you all of this, I forgot some of the other artists that were up and coming then. So anyway, I would get all the newspapers of all my favorite cities, and that's how we found artists.
You were doing your homework.
I was doing my homework,
Yeah.
and like I said, Bob Krasnow referred all the lawyers and managers and young artists who he couldn't be bothered with because he had to run a company.
Yes.
And so soon, my brown box that was on the floor there filled up with every cassette known to man. And that was the beginning of my life as an A&R person.
So what do you consider perhaps your biggest triumph in terms of signing, in terms of where somebody went?
Well,
I don't know. Is there one?
Well, of course there's one, and they're called Metallica. They were the second band that I signed when I got to Elektra. The first band that I signed was a little band called Shrapnel that Legs McNeil and John Holstrom from Punk Magazine loved. I fell in love with them.
Yeah.
Even Norman Mailer fell in love with them, and he had them play at his parties in Brooklyn. And
how funny.
They became dear friends, and I made an EP with them. Richie Cordell, who was responsible for like Tommy James and the Shondells and Joan Jett, produced part of the EP, and Vince Ely, the drummer for the Psychedelic Furs, produced the other two songs. We made an EP. It did okay, but the powers that be just didn't love them.
Yeah.
So it was a lesson. Yeah. It was a lesson in perhaps don't sign your friends. And it was my first signing. Yeah. What did I know?
That's great.
I just knew it was good music.
Yeah. Yeah.
It didn't sell, but that didn't mean anything. I mean, it meant something to me, but it didn't mean anything to me in regards to I still loved the music. And at some point, I knew about a little label called Megaforce Records, run by a man named John Zazula and his wife Marcia. And John then knew about me, that I was the new young A&R person at Elektra, and I was going out every night. And I don't remember if John mailed me the vinyl first or he came to my office. And we just got along famously, I think, immediately. And I liked him very, very much. And one of the first 3 records that he asked me to listen to was the first Raven album, Anthrax album, and Metallica album. Yeah, so at that point in time, we became friends, and John was convinced that we can restart that perhaps in your editing. John was convinced that Raven was going to take over the world.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, okay. And, John was an up-and-coming independent label. And I don't think they had much money at all. But they were dedicated, and they were making records,
Yes, they were.
So, indeed. So he asked me if I would give him money for some Raven demos. And I liked Raven. I loved the Gallagher brothers. I loved Wacko. Yes. Whenever Wacko would see me totally drunk out, he would throw me over his shoulder, put me in a cab to make sure I got home. They were lovely people. And that first album, I forget what their first album on Megaforce was called.
Was it Rock Till You Drop? Maybe?
Possibly. Anyway, so I did a 5-song demo with them. It was terrific. But the problem was I heard Kill 'Em All. Yeah.
That's quite a distraction.
Yeah, it was a very big distraction.
Yes.
And what I also knew early on was my listening was not so conventional, Like I knew I loved punk rock, and my favorite band was the Dead Boys, and I didn't like anything that was nice and neat and in a perfect, I don't know, square or what a box.
Well, Raven sort of fit in the new wave of British heavy metal.
That's right. Fabulous. But like I said, once I heard Kill 'Em All,
Metallica was more rogue, for sure.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was big and dirty, and you really didn't ever hear anything like that before.
Yeah.
So I knew that I told John at some point that I didn't want to move forward with Raven, and then I guess we didn't talk for weeks, and I just kept listening to Kill 'Em All. And at some point, I should backtrack a little bit, because Phil Cavano from Monster Magnet, who was then in Shrapnel, we both went to see Metallica at Lemoore in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And I think it was right when I started my job, even before I met John. So I had heard about them. I went to see them. I got this record from John, and I thought to myself, I have to have these people in my life. And it was going to be tricky because they were under contract. So I made a very quiet trip to Los Angeles, and I saw Metallica at the Troubadour. And it was sensational. I mean, for me, it was riveting. I felt like these 4 young people are so charismatic. Wow. They have that wow factor. When it was over, I said hi to Lars. I said, I work for Elektra. And he goes, well, you do know we're on Megaforce. And I said, I do. But I gave him my business card. I guess he looked me up. We didn't talk after that. And at some point, I was trying to figure out how I was going to sign them to Elektra. So anyway, he did call me up, and he says there's going to be a Megaforce night at Roseland, August of 1984. And it was Raven, Anthrax, and Metallica. I believe Metallica were in the middle slot.
Yes.
And, you know, once they came on, everybody in the place just lost their mind.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
I was there, I remember.
and it's like no disrespect to the other 2 bands who were fabulous, but they were the talk of the town right then and there.
Oh, yeah.
So, like I've said 100 times, I went backstage, I locked the door, and I was, you know, hugging, kissing everybody, and they were looking at me like, what the F? Who is this person? And like James looked at me like, who is this guy, please? And Lars said, that's Michael Alago from Elektra. And he's like, he's the record company guy? I mean, because, you know, I'm 23, they must be 21. Right. So I guess they didn't really have a clear picture of what... or
they had a picture of what they thought.
They thought that they had a picture of what they thought a major label A&R person would look like. Right. And then I show up.
And it was not you.
No, right. I was
you,
right.
yes.
It was me, but that wasn't the look. And you know, I invited them up to the office the next day. I got Chinese food and beer, and I let them know that I wanted to sign them to Elektra, and that I really could help change their life. Yeah. And it was a very delicate situation contractually, but we just made it work, and money talks. So, yeah. And, you know, that day, which I think was the next day or a day after, in my office at Elektra, in the conference room, it just felt like they just never left, you know? And people were talking about them then, especially after Roseland. Yeah. But, you know, I just felt so confident that I was going to get this band. Yeah. And I did.
Well, and what you did for them.
Oh, absolutely.
And what you did in that move, what you did for metal, for heavy music, globally, it's amazing.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, you know, I kind of feel that way as well. I felt like that signing changed the face of what everybody was listening to.
Absolutely.
And then keep in mind, and I always bring up Mila's band, Creator. I knew about Creator.
Yes.
And he knows that I always bring him up. I haven't seen him in years, but I friggin' loved that band. Yeah. And then, of course, at the same time, Metal Church was coming up from Washington State, Slayer, the other 2 bands that we're talking about, Raven and Anthrax. So I forget where I'm going with all this because I'm talking too long.
Just in terms of changing the world, the global
I remember.
Conversation about music. Yeah.
Yes, the conversation did change, and what happened then was everybody now was hoping that they would find their own Metallica.
Yes.
But that doesn't happen.
No.
You know, a thing like Metallica, you know, perhaps happens every 20 odd years or so.
Yeah.
But everybody else got their version of what they wanted. Atlantic got Raven, Island Records got Anthrax. I think Rick Rubin signed Slayer at a Def Jam.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in my book, that's a signing.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, I love Slayer. I love Slayer. Yeah. So yeah, that signing did change the landscape of what everybody was listening to.
Absolutely.
And it was huge. It really was huge.
Yeah.
And you know, like I'm so proud of that, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. You should be.
Yeah.
You really,
thank
really
you.
should be. Yeah. And from the world to you, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's super, super important. Talk
Yes.
about being a rocker for life. That's who you are.
Absolutely, yes. And you know, still 35 years later after that signing,
Yeah.
Metallica is still playing stadiums.
Yes.
You know, people could say whatever they want about Metallica, but I think when you're that big of a band, you're also damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Right.
Like, you know, people still wish they made those first 3 records,
Yes.
but you can't do that.
Yes.
You know, so you have to experiment a little bit. You have to do stuff that's different.
Yeah.
Oh, are we overtime?
We're not. Oh, that's okay. Don't worry about that.
Wow.
We're fine.
So you're definitely going to have to edit me.
And this is a rocking chair. I didn't tell you that this is a rocking chair.
Oh, it's a rocking chair. A
I don't know.
rocking chair.
Yeah, rock.
Duh. Okay, great.
I forgot.
In any event, you know, here we are, like I said, 35 years later, we're still talking about Metallica.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I'm going to go see them in Twickenham, London, next week at some stadium.
Nice.
And, you know, they're just as brilliant as they were back then.
Yeah.
Totally a different animal.
Sure.
Right, but mature and just fantastic. Really,
Yeah.
there's still nobody like them.
So can I ask you one more thing?
Sure, of course,
And if you
please.
can answer it quickly, do you have a memory of Cliff Burton that would be?
Oh, he was
Good.
adorable. He was fantastic. He was very sweet. He also loved all kinds of music. When they got to the conference room that day, he asked me, did I have any Simon and Garfunkel? And I said, no, Cliff, that's CBS, but I will go get you Simon and Garfunkel. And then he kind of knew about this label that we distributed called None Such. Very esoteric.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he wanted None Such. So I got him every bit of None Such vinyl that I could get him. And as the next year went on, I would always tease him about his elephant bell bottoms that he wore, those big
Yes.
wide bell bottoms.
Yes.
Just as, you know, like just to tease him.
Yeah.
And he was just a lovely person. He was so smart. I mean, he really was the best musician in the band at that time,
Wow.
I think.
Wow.
And he was just like a lovely human being.
Yeah.
And he was very centered musically. Like he knew, as well as the other guys in the band, but he knew what he wanted to do in that band.
Yeah.
And he was extraordinary.
Yeah.
You know, that playing was also
Oh, yeah.
coming from like a one-of-a-kind person.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was a very sweet guy, and of course taken from us too early. It was either September 26th or 28th of 1986. So we only got to see each other a few times between 84 and 86 and
Yeah.
his passing.
Yeah. Well, that's still a really lovely memory, and thank you
Oh,
for that.
fantastic.
So,
Yeah.
Michael Alago, tell us the name of your book again.
Oh, God, yeah. But you know, just so you know, there is a documentary about me.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
I mean, I got to put it all in there. So there's a documentary about me on Netflix called Who the F Is That Guy? The Fabulous Journey of Michael Alago.
Fabulous.
Thank you. It was directed by Drew Stone, produced by Michael Alex. And what happened, that became so popular and it became a game changer for me and Drew and Michael when it hit Netflix because now it was global. And that movie being global got me a book deal. So I got signed to a little company called Backbeat Books, who were then bought by a bigger company called Roman and Littlefield. And the book comes out November 15th. It's called I Am Michael Alago, and the subtitle is Breathing Music, Signing Metallica, Beating Death.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then I'll add to that, Rocker for Life.
Rockers for life. That's a wrap. Rock on.